You know that feeling when someone hurts you, and instead of pulling away, you lean in a little closer? When your friends list the red flags calmly, rationally, and you find yourself explaining the other person's stress, their past, the pressure they're under. When the relationship ends and you're exhausted, but a small part of you still wonders if you could have handled it better. There's a certain kind of person who keeps finding themselves in relationships that feel intense, magnetic, and slowly destabilizing. Not because they crave chaos, not because they enjoy being mistreated, but because something in the dynamic feels strangely familiar. And that familiarity can be powerful. From the outside, this pattern is often labeled in simple ways: low standards, bad boundaries, too empathetic. People assume it's a weakness or a lack of discernment, that if someone keeps attracting toxic partners, there must be something broken in their judgment. But what often gets missed is that it isn't random, it's patterned. And patterns come from somewhere. This isn't about a flaw in your character, it's about how your nervous system learned to define connection. The hidden pattern in people who attract toxic relationships isn't desperation, it's attunement. There's more going on here than most people realize. Psychologically, many toxic relationship dynamics are built on inconsistency. Intense closeness followed by distance, warmth interrupted by withdrawal, affection mixed with criticism. In behavioral science, intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable reward, is one of the most powerful conditioning mechanisms we know. It's the same principle that makes slot machines addictive. The brain releases dopamine not just from reward, but from the anticipation of uncertain reward. In relationships, that uncertainty can feel like chemistry. When someone pulls away and then comes back with affection, the nervous system lights up. The relief feels euphoric. The bond feels deeper. It's not because pain is enjoyable, it's because the body has been trained to equate emotional volatility with emotional significance. Neuroscience shows that early attachment experiences shape how the brain encodes safety and love. If closeness in childhood was mixed with unpredictability, a caregiver who was warm one day and distant the next, emotionally overwhelmed or hard to read, the developing brain adapts. It becomes hyper-attuned. It learns to scan subtle shifts in tone, facial expression, energy. That hyper-attunement is often praised later in life. You're perceptive, empathetic, deep. You can sense what someone is feeling before they say it. You understand complexity in people. You see their wounds beneath their behavior. But the same sensitivity that makes you insightful can also make inconsistency feel like intimacy. If love once required emotional vigilance, then intensity feels like connection. Calm, steady affection can feel quiet, maybe even slightly unfamiliar. None of this is conscious. It lives in the nervous system. The body remembers patterns long before the mind labels them. Over time, the brain starts to predict that closeness involves effort, that love requires interpretation, patience, earning. So when you meet someone emotionally stable and consistent, there's less to decode, less activation, less adrenaline. And without realizing it, part of you may register that as a lack of spark. This isn't a preference for toxicity, it's an adaptation to early emotional environments. And adaptations are intelligent. Children don't choose the emotional climate they grow up in, they adapt to it. If love required managing another person's moods, you learned to manage. If affection was conditional, you learned to perform stability. If connection came after conflict, you learned to endure conflict as a pathway to closeness. Those strategies worked. They helped you maintain attachment. They helped you survive relational uncertainty. The adult version of that survival strategy can look like attracting partners who need fixing, soothing, or stabilizing. People who feel intense, people who struggle, people whose affection feels earned after effort. It's not that you're drawn to harm, you're drawn to familiarity. And familiarity feels safe even when it's painful. It's important to say this clearly. Being wired this way is not better or worse than any other attachment style. Some people withdraw at the first sign of instability, others pursue, others shut down emotionally. These are all nervous system strategies shaped by experience. No one is morally superior for the way they bond.
Different histories create different forms of vigilance. The quiet irony is that the very traits that make you vulnerable to toxic dynamics are also strengths. Your depth, your empathy, your capacity to see nuance in people, your willingness to hold space for complexity. The paradox is that these strengths can blur boundaries if they're not paired with self-protection. You may understand someone's trauma so well that you unintentionally minimize its impact on you. You may be so skilled at regulating others that you override your own discomfort. You may confuse intensity with depth because, historically, depth always came wrapped in intensity. There's also a hidden cost that often goes unnoticed: exhaustion. People who repeatedly attract toxic relationships are often carrying the emotional labor of two nervous systems. They monitor, anticipate, soothe, and adapt. Over time, this creates a quiet depletion. You become the stabilizer, the interpreter, the emotional anchor, and because you're good at it, others may not even realize how much effort it takes. The counterintuitive layer here is this: you're not overly attached to the person, you're attached to the possibility. When you sense someone's potential, who they could be if healed, if safe, if less reactive, your empathy fills in the gaps. You bond not only with who they are, but with who you imagine they might become. And that vision feels meaningful, it feels purposeful, it feels like depth. But potential is not the same as presence. Over time, some people begin to notice that what feels like chemistry often carries anxiety, that the spark is sometimes just activation, that calm doesn't mean boring, it means regulated. This realization can feel disorienting at first, because if intensity isn't love, then what is? Often it's steadiness, predictability, mutual emotional responsibility, a nervous system that doesn't require constant management. For someone wired for attunement, this can initially feel unfamiliar, not wrong, just new.
If you see yourself in this pattern, there is nothing defective about you. Your system learned to equate love with effort for a reason. It was protecting something tender. It was trying to maintain connection in the only way it knew how. The fact that you bond deeply is not a flaw. The fact that you see potential in others is not naive. The fact that you can tolerate emotional complexity is not weakness. It simply means your nervous system was trained to stay when things feel unstable. And nervous systems can learn new definitions of safety. Not by force, not by shame, but by gradual exposure to relationships that feel different. Relationships where you don't have to earn calm, where affection doesn't disappear and reappear unpredictably, where your empathy is met, not consumed. The pattern of attracting toxic relationships is rarely about what you lack, it's about what you adapted to. And once you begin to see the pattern, it loses some of its invisibility. It becomes something you can observe, rather than something that unconsciously drives you. There's a quiet relief in understanding that your history shaped your chemistry, that your reactions are patterned, not personal failings. If this felt uncomfortably accurate, there's likely another layer to your wiring we haven't even touched yet. The part that influences not just who you attract, but who feels safe enough to stay. And that's where things get even more interesting.